extra information in their opening paragraphs. And then I wrote things like, you know, kids were missing topic sentences and things that would have helped the person reading the essay to understand what they were trying to argue in a particular part. And then in some places where they had, you know, nice elements to their essays, I would try to give them positive feedback as well, so they weren't just getting negative comments.
The reason I asked about the rubric was that I find it interesting that as you were talking about your lesson plan development
Yes.
and the evolution over time, that assessment piece kind of fell out of your final versions
Right.
of your lesson plan, and that surprised me a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. That's a good point. I guess that I kind of thought about my assessment as being something that I would more put on my long-term plans than on individual lesson plans. And so, yeah, it's just, it was easier for me that final lesson plan format that I came up with.
The other thing
It's
that I
not
thought was
perfect, but
interesting in that
yeah.
lesson plan was that you kind of lost and you spoke to this a little bit, the need for modifications.
Right.
And I'm curious about, even if you have kids in your class who are, you know, I'm going to call them, you know, honors level kids or kids who are working pretty well with the text or that complete a lot of their work, you probably have in a class of 30 kids who are reading in about 30 different ways.
Right.
So kids who come at that text in a very different kind of a way. Did you have to scaffold any of your reading for kids to get in and out of the text? So you shared that passage on your Crusades. And I'm wondering if you had a kid who might not have been an engaged reader, how you got them into that?
To be honest with you, I didn't have any issues with that I was aware of. A lot of these activities that we did, like the primary source activity, we'd actually do in groups, so that kind of probably helped to avoid some of those issues where kids could kind of work with each other and avoid it if there was one particular kid that would have had an issue reading that stuff. And I tried to move around the classroom and help them read things if there were words that they were unfamiliar with and things. Help them with those.
Well, as you're thinking about going into diverse contexts, that's probably something you might want to fold back into your lesson plan in a way, is thinking about how you're going to work with struggling readers as they work with those kinds of really dense texts.
I think one thing to think about there is like seeing concept attainments, concept development and framing routines as nice modifications for students as well. So if you want to talk to that a little bit.
Sure.
And show what you've got there. And then the last thing, after you've done that, the last one I want you to talk about is your love of Google Earth, about if you've got any evidence talking about that. Your love affair with Google
That's
Earth.
in my, I have a bunch of the Google Earth stuff in my video, actually, my digital humanities video. So,
My thinking is Google Earth needs to go into digital humanities as a whole.
yeah.
Yeah. It needs to be. Okay.
Concept masteries and frames. Okay, so I started out with this is my whole introduction paper on the different concepts and frames that I used. I actually was very skeptical of this stuff when I first started out. One of those things that I couldn't really envision using in my classroom very much. It's just because I'm not much of a graphic organizer person myself. It's not something that works well for me, but I found that it actually works really well for the kids in certain contexts. So one thing that I used it for was to kind of spark debate and get the kids to develop their own critical thinking skills. So like we did a concept diagram on religion, the concept of religion, after we had talked about all these different Asian religions like Hinduism and Buddhism, Shinto and all these different things. We tried to, as a class, talk about what constitutes a religion, and each class that I did it with kind of had a different idea about it, and that was okay with me because I wasn't concerned about having an absolute correct definition of a religion, but just getting the kids to kind of talk about it and work through that process. The other concept that we did was for Renaissance, and this sort of helped to get the kids out of the idea that Renaissance or this type of a period was only confined to the 12 through 1500s in Italy. That there were other periods such as Charlemagne's rule of the Franks and different times that Abbasid Caliphate in the Islamic empire that could also be considered these Renaissance periods where culture was blooming and that sort of thing. For the framing routines, the biggest thing that I used these for was as a review at the end of a unit. I found it was a really good tool to use this to help the kids remember the different elements of each of the different kingdoms or civilizations that we talked about, and then it was something that they can take home and use as a really good study tool for them after that. So we did an example of that for the different African kingdoms, and we did an example of that comparing the Crusades and the Renaissance, the different parts of the Renaissance, and then we did one for Indian religions. So we compared the major historical religions that have influenced India, the Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam as well.
Google Earth, real fast.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is with that is, you know, you've done things like things like the concept, attainment, the framing, can appear. They are modifications using history live material. They are modifications. So when you're in jobs and you're talking about it, don't just see these modifications as like looking at the IEP. It's these type of things that work with different children and being aware of that. And I think you have many that are layered through what you do. Sorry.
It's going to come up here in a couple seconds. So this is just an example of some fun stuff that you can do with Google Earth to kind of get the kids excited about the places that you're talking about. This is in Rio de Janeiro. This guys out on the beach in school. And then this is just a more basic example of the ways that you can zoom in on a region and look at different places, and then, you know, down to a closer level. Up on the stage, we were talking about Australia, and we're going to look at Canberra and see what that was like, and kind of compare it to our capital and see what just the landscape is like there. So I said that it's basically puts the world at your fingertips. It's the closest thing that you can do to actually going to a different place without leaving the classroom.